All right. So we are here today again for the Creativity Talks with Rene Urbanovich and myself, Crystal Hoshaw. And today we have E Rydall, an artist, and we're going to be talking about your experience. You have some really interesting life experiences with your art, so I'm excited to dig into that.
Me too.
Great.
Yeah, so I can share a little about, the bio that you shared with me, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm E, and I go by E because Elizabeth has 4 syllables. And it became too long, like in the 2nd grade. And I'm an artist and a mom, a meditator, a reader. I teach art and sometimes language arts as well. I love education. I'm an education freak. And mostly I spend most of my days meditating and painting. Those are my big activities that I enjoy and that I do creatively.
I love it. Life goals, right? Meditating and painting.
Right. It's good.
Yeah, so I saw in your bio you told that you've been painting really since childhood, and that you have these memories actually of really specific things that you painted in your childhood.
Yes. One that comes to mind, because I always wanted to paint big surfaces, and we had a very small house, and my mom was a painter. She painted small paintings. They're lovely, but I always was attracted to really big surfaces, and so my brothers had a fish house, that sat out on the barren white snowy lake, in the winter, and they would fish in it. And I remember painting up those sides of that fish house. Was so bold sitting out there. It's really bright. I think I was inspired by Peter Max at that time, so it was like woo, And then my mother raised our family on the income she made in a dress shop, a little clothing boutique in a small tourist town in the lake area of Minnesota. And there were some bare walls, so I took over those. But I think my funniest story about being creative with paint is, as a freshman in college, no, actually I must have been a sophomore, because I was the RA. I think I was the RA. So I really shouldn't have been doing this, but we broke into the janitor's closet, stole a bunch of paint in the middle of the night, guerilla painted the whole, common room in the dormitory, and then just put the paint back and, went back to bed and just waited to see what happened in the morning. Well, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to get kicked out of this. I'm not going to be an RA anymore. This is big trouble, right? Mm-hmm. It was so fun. It was worth it. And, but much to the contrary, I got called into the office of the head RA, and she said, "You took that paint from the janitor, right?" Sorry, I didn't like to do that. And you did that all in one night. Yeah, I know. Goes, "We'd like you to do some other rooms as well." So I got to paint a couple of common rooms in my dormitory, which was super fun.
Yeah. So what was the motivation for that? Did you have like some statement you were trying to make, or were you just completely compelled to access the art supplies, or what was it?
I'm always compelled to paint.
Mm-hmm.
I get up in the morning thinking about it, and I sometimes meditate particularly on the paintings that are coming into my mind, like visioning kind of. And that's always been there. So it wasn't anything unusual for me. It was just like, okay, we got to find the paint and we got to do this up. I mean, they just had white walls. Come on, in a dormitory, that's not right.
Yeah. 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 I recognize that impulse that you had as a kid when you see something blank, big, and empty. Can you talk a little bit about that desire to fill that space, what that feels like for you, and kind of break that down a little bit?
It's just, you fall in love with something over your lifetime, right? It could be cooking, it could be singing, it could be doing whatever job you have assigned or a hobby or something. I mean, you fall in love with something, I think, at a really young age, because we lived way out in the country. The only telephone we had was a party line. And, when I listened in on people's conversations, they weren't that interesting. So we had some art supplies because my mom was a painter. So I just have always wanted to, unleash my creativity that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's my chosen way. And I do love lots of the other things. I love cooking. I like playing tennis. I love going hiking. I love conversation. But there's always been a really strong impulse to paint.
Uh-huh.
Play with those materials and see what I can do with them.
Yeah. And is that specific to painting for you, or do you find that it kind of bleeds out into other modalities or mediums as well?
I think the life lessons, that come through painting or any activity, they're always overlapping. They're like sort of in harmony with one another, right? So if I learn something in my painting one day, then I look at all the other areas of my life through that lens and see if it works.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, really, I think
I want to ask you a question.
Together. Okay, questions.
You just mentioned that if you learn something, as if the painting is teaching you or speaking to you, can you go into that? Let me hear like a time when you learned something while painting something.
Yeah. Okay, I got to pull up a specific one because it happens all the time. Okay. I was really attracted at one point to not only paint specific objects, but to use papers behind, like papers, collaging papers in the background. And I was thinking, like, what's this about? Like, these papers are just, sometimes they have musical notes on them, sometimes they're floral, sometimes they have little gold flecks. And what I was learning from the painting was that what I loved and what I valued was the images kind of seeping through and it telling me a story about the object and about how we all see the object different and how this is a big one. This one came from specifically doing that technique, the collage with the paint. And I was painting a cello. And I love musical instruments, but I was looking at the cello and it was just golden and in my mind. And I was seeing all these words and images coming through and a child practicing. And once I got to go see Yo-Yo Ma at the Hollywood Bowl, and I was thinking about, how Yo-Yo Ma must feel about his cello and just all these different things. And what I was finding were that the papers were telling me a story about the cello. And so my relationship to cello is very different than anybody else's. I mean, somebody might look at a cello painting of a cello and go, you are out of here. I need to have the Dodgers on my wall. But my son played the cello in our house, and I remember being so in love with the tones of the cello, plus he was super good at it. So it was beautiful. It wasn't, it was really, really beautiful. And so my relationship to the cello, when I'm putting all those papers on and all those layers in my painting, it's many meanings to me and how other people might look at it and see other completely different meanings. And I think that's how life is, we look at our life and we assign it meanings. And so I like in my paintings for that to be spoken about.
And so that kind of dovetails into your interest in contemplative practices. Do you see art itself and painting specifically as a contemplative practice?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think at this age, everything's a contemplative practice, right? I mean, you start out in your 20s and you don't want to think about anything. You just want to have fun and be impulsive and paint your dorm room. But then as you raise children, and I mean, you look really young, Crystal, but as you go through these stages of life, you get, I think, more and more contemplative, and that contemplation process just gets richer and richer because we're richer which richer from experiences. And so that contemplative process just is in everything you do. You might be cooking and really thinking about, something important, the love you're putting into the meal, and how special the meal is going to be because your kids are coming over, or the conversation you want to have at dinner, and these green peppers, I grew them in my garden, so everything's really a contemplative meditation.
Yeah.
It's just, are you aware and conscious about what you're choosing to think about, or are you not?
Yeah, I totally agree. I teach meditation, but I also have, dealt with a lot of anxiety in my life, and sometimes sitting in absolute silence in a completely non-conceptual framework for meditation isn't accessible, whether it's because you're too anxious or you're too impatient or whatever the case may be. And I've found that just having a slight intermediary, whether it's the canvas or it's, my pan on the stove, it's almost like it's giving my brain a job so that it thinks that it's occupied. And yet at the same time, there's enough space that's not so overstimulated, by a screen or something, where a lot of insight and a lot of clarity can come up and reflection. And not in an active way necessarily, but in that kind of passive receptive way that I think art tends to engender in us.
And also, what I'm hearing from both of you is what we always talk about as far as from the theoretical standpoint of creativity, and how creativity is hardwired in our DNA to unite us. It's a unifying force, and it unites us first, me with myself, atonement at one-ment, connecting me to my deeper realm, and then ultimately connecting me with the world around me and with others, so that we are all one. So it's the biggest unifying force for all of us and nature and the universe. So when you start out saying it's that the arts are contemplative, or, painting or cooking or whatever, it really is, it serves the whole ultimately, because we're connecting and we're getting our atonement first. And then we contribute who we are, not necessarily just our gifts of our paintings or the food that we cook to our family, but who we are becomes our work of art, and we contribute that to the collective.
Yeah, that's really
good. And I think it's really true. Yeah. I had this journaling lately. My journal's not sitting here, or I'd pull it out. But it was something about exactly what you just said, Rene. It was about how I have now a consciousness of when something's new to me, and I love this. Okay, I had to start this story with Elizabeth Gilbert. I went to an Elizabeth Gilbert workshop.
Wow.
It was like with Deepak Chopra or something, and it was fabulous. She's a fabulous teacher and fabulous writer. If anyone's written or read any of her books, Eat, Pray, Love was like the big famous one, but the books since then that she's written are brilliant. And she writes great female characters. Anyway, so she's giving this workshop, and she says that this is what she believes. She believes that ideas, they come kind of from the source, or whatever you believe in as a source, and they sort of buzz around until somebody grabs them. So when you get ideas, you gotta, if you want to move on it, like, I want to write a book about firemen, it's right there. Gotta grab that. Because if you want to spend your time that way, because somebody's going to grab it within the next few days and write that. And I have to say that it's kind of an unusual theory, but as I've tested it, it's kind of true. And that's why, isn't there another theory about that, where an idea pops out like a lot of different places at the same time?
Yeah, that, to me, that is the collective unconscious. So there's some ideas that have been around since the beginning, but when there's like something just bubbling up in that big pool of all truth and knowledge, we have that collective unconscious, and some people are truly connected and they're going to grab it. And I do like how she thinks of it as an idea that flies through the room and you better grab it. And that, I've written a stupid little article once about how at one time there was like 2 pig movies, like Babe and another one.
Yes.
And then there was an ant's life and bugs. And I mean, I made this list of when the studios were all putting out these movies and they were similar, and they came out at such the same time that there's no way you could explain it as necessarily swooping and stealing each other's ideas, because it takes so long for production that it just seems like the collective unconscious, that pool, is whoever's connected to it's going to grab those ideas and produce them. But it's like when you name a baby something and you think you're the first to think of it, and then all of a sudden there's 25 Tessas or something.
Right.
Yes, that's exactly it. And so I was thinking of, or in my journaling, swirling back to that story. In my journal, I was contemplating, or I was kind of coming up with this way that things happen for me. And first of all, I grabbed that idea, right? Or it's an idea, it's a feeling, it's a knowing, it's a something. And then it's in me for a while. And that's when I really need to sit quietly with it for me. And I can meditate pretty easily now after so many years, but I have to really go in deep and see where it settles within me. And that part is really delightful, but also that idea or that thing is very vulnerable in this state. So it's better for me not to talk about it, publish it. Yeah, Crystal's nodding. It's an embryo, right? It's an embryo, this baby idea. And then my baby idea becomes a toddler. No. Then my baby idea grows strong inside me, and that's when I can put it out to the world and not feel, anguished if the world isn't as loving of it as I am.
Yeah.
I like, that's one of the, it's in my book, but it's in several books, that's one of the process of creativity, that the conception, which is the idea, first the inspiration, then the conception, and then the gestation, and then the execution, and then the reception. It's like having a baby. 9 months of, germinating and developing, and then you give it birth and you execute the idea, and then people come and hug that baby and tell you what they think, got a big nose.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I think there's actually a study. It's floating around in my brain somewhere. There's a study, and I'll have to dig it up and put it in the show notes, about scientists on, opposite sides of the world coming up with ideas right around the same time. And so there's this theory actually exists as like a codified theory, let's say, that there is some kind of something going on in the collective unconscious, because some complex scientific idea will be discovered, and then a few months later, people who've had no contact with one another will come up with the same idea.
Here's a book that you might want to see if you haven't. Maybe you're talking about this book, Crystal. You and I are always on the same wavelength. It's called Art and Physics by Dr. Leonard Shlain. He was the brain scientist, but he expanded his vocabulary and his impact on the world by writing an 600-page book. He goes through each and every scientific discovery, and prior to the scientific discovery, an artist painted it first. It's consistent, painting after painting after painting, either 100 or 2 or 20 years before the science came, the artist perceived it. It's such a good book.
That's awesome.
I've always felt that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me, Rene, you gave me that book, and I've read parts of it, but never the whole thing. But you make it sound great.
I think that when you read it I used to teach it in my class, but it's just so heady. It's hard to teach an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old. But you can just take it like a Bible. Just read this one this day, this one another week, or whatever, because it's amazing. Just one discovery at a time. One at a time is like, really? But then when you get them all together, but then he gets into the universal brain.
And you're loving that.
Yeah, well, because how else can you explain it? And he uses the ants, the carpenter ants that never live to see what they built because they die, but then their babies know to finish the amazing structure that's in their bodies. So it's such a good book. Anyway, you can put that in your show notes.
Yeah, I definitely will. I want to ask a question about that, because this is how I've always felt about art and movies, media, whatever. When we see stuff up on the screen, I feel like I'm literally looking in a crystal ball, very often. So for instance, I tell this story a lot, but I saw Children of Men when I was like 14 years old or something. Do you guys know what that movie is? It's like post-apocalyptic, really, really hard, like really heavy. And so, seeing that at 14, I was like, this is where our collective unconscious is going. And people think, oh, we're just going to make a movie and make a bunch of money and then we'll be entertained by it. But have you seen that phenomenon as well? Like, when we're creating something, we're kind of creating the future because we're putting our attention and our blood, sweat, and tears, if you will, into it. And so especially in media, I feel like that is the case.
I love what you just said. Oh, sorry, Rene, did I interrupt?
No, please, go ahead.
I love what you just said because I think as we do the creative task that's before us, and that can be washing dishes, changing the baby, it can be, getting the sewer pumped. It just really doesn't matter. Whatever creative task is before us. And as we do it lovingly, with love and appreciation, I think we bring a holiness to it or a sacredness to it. And in doing so, anything that you're loving and appreciating keeps expanding, right? It's even been proven with plants that get no attention. I have a lot of those. And she's always painting. My plants are going, she's always painting.
I'm right here.
Yeah, really. Those things expand in your life. So I know one thing that happened with me in a really creative stage of my life when I was actually had just gone through divorce and was going through divorce and had met somebody really special who's now my life partner. A new creative task came to me, and that was channeling, oddly. It's nothing I'd ever considered before, but this new kind of voice came to me and a whole new visual. And since then, it's been a voice that has been with me, and I call it Jame. And it's been a voice that's been with me the whole time. And so it's been about 5 or 6 years. And what I love about that is I think you get assigned like these new tasks as you do the ones that are before you right now. And so life is always adventurous that way. It's always an adventure. And I think back to something my auntie told me when I was a kid. She said, "You're really lucky." And I said, "Huh?" I was like unibrow, my teeth were like this. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm really lucky." And it just looked so awful. And she was so sweet. She said, "You're really lucky because you are creative." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And she goes, "You know what a creative person can do? They can take nothing and make something out of it." And I thought, wow, that's big. That's really big. And I've always thought about that. And I still love her so much. She's still alive, my godmother. But that was so mind-blowing. And it's still something I contemplate. And I think that there's some truth to it, that I'm constantly creating the next thing. Mm-hmm. And I think you are too. We all are. Yeah. And so where your attention is really important, because if it's always on things that you don't want, you're just creating more of what you don't want. And it's really important to keep our attention stayed on thee, right? Stayed on thee meaning keeping it on love, keeping it on joy, keeping it on harmony.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When I got my glasses, they put a little thing in there that said, "What you focus on grows." I thought, how clever that they're putting it in glasses.
Yeah.
But as an artist, theorist, whatever you want to call me, I do feel like that is the burden and the job of the bard sometimes, is to spend time in the darkness so that they can create a work that is going to function as a warning to society, even if it is very painful the whole 3 years they're doing it. I'm sure Picasso did not enjoy doing Guernica, but as it functioned in society as a reflection of the horrors of war. I always use that example. It's on the tip of my tongue. But just like the movie you said, Children of Men, perhaps it wasn't just for entertainment and to make money. perhaps the author or the person who wrote the piece meant for it to be a warning to society. So there's going to be a fine line between the bard, the prophet type artist that sees shit that they have to point out. Comedians do it, they point it out. George Carlin, he was really grouchy and negative, but he was trying to get us to be thinking critically. So it just
That's why I love comedy.
Yeah. And so at least they're making you laugh, right? But I know if you focus on the negative, then the problem, you have to focus on the solution. So where does that person fit? They could have a really sad life, but that's their calling. They might be sad all the time.
Sure. Yeah, I think of it a little bit like a Cassandra complex, right? Like Cassandra is from Greek mythology, and honestly, I can't remember the story off the top of my head, but basically she's a seer. She has a curse, so she can see the future, but she's cursed that no one will ever believe her.
Oh.
And that's often how I think of truth tellers, right? And that could, like, maybe the most extreme example is, people who are martyred for what they stand for. But being persecuted for what you believe in and speaking out, and whether it's a truth teller through art or through comedy or whatever, there is a little bit of a degree of like you're foreseeing the future, and maybe no one will believe you in so far as people won't really heed the call and take action or whatever. But at the same time, there's, what you mentioned, E, is that the act of creating itself is a devotion. So in that case, it's a devotion to truth. And it can also be devotion to the creative impulse itself. Like you're mentioning this voice, right? That reminds me of more Elizabeth Gilbert, I think in Big Magic. She talks about, she talks about the muses in Greek mythology, and she talks about that voice and almost like taking orders, right? Taking orders from the voice. And so when you make yourself receptive, you become this force for the creative impulse itself. And so I was curious to ask you, E, if in your practice, in your creative practice, do you have a spiritual parallel as well? Or is the creativity, the spirituality, is it one and the same? How does that work for you?
I'd say one and the same is the closest answer. They kind of, are the two fibers in my weave. The weft and what's the other one called? I don't know. I should know this, but it's two kinds of fibers running in two different directions. Yeah. They work together really well. And that's all I have to say. Something's there, but I haven't grabbed it out of the air yet. Let's see.
No, I think it's symbiotic. They feed off of each other. Your spirituality informs your art, what comes out on the outside, what you see, and your art informs your spirituality. It's just symbiotic. It's amazing that they're married.
Yeah.
It's hard to pull them apart because when I'm painting, it's like a meditation. And when I am in my meditation, at some points, it's a lot of art in there. So, and it's interesting because you can tell when you're sort of on your right path, because there are all these symbols that make your life different than other people's. Not better, just different. Like when I am riding along in the car looking at the landscape or the trash or whatever, it's all about art for me. So I see the trees, and so the trees look to me like brushstrokes. So my mind is going, oh, which brush would I use? Yeah, okay, yeah, got that. And so, that's just part of who I am. It doesn't make my kind of creativity any more creative than anybody else's, because everybody's life is creative. It's just who we are, right, Rene?
That's right. Yes. Tune into my TED Talk. I'm kidding.
I want to.
No, I like how you keep enforcing that everything you do can be sacred, as long as you're putting loving attention to it, because any creative act, any act that you do is creative when it connects you to the moment, who you are, others, the universe, your art, all of that. So I love that you keep reiterating that. And Crystal, what about you? I was going to ask you, I know that I'm constantly writing, like and I wish I was really sitting down my ass at the computer and I'm really writing, but every minute I'm narrating, every minute I am metaphoring something in my head. It's constant. And I've been like that since 4th grade. So now what's yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it brings up actually kind of a counter story, but just to answer the question first, I would say mostly writing, sometimes painting, sometimes things I can't even do. Like, oh, I want to make that into clay. And then I try, I'm like, wow, I cannot do this. Like, I don't, like, I've never taken a clay class or anything, you know, or I have to like put that in stained glass. Like that impulse is there, even though the training or even experience at all is not there. But I would say primarily writing. Yet at the same time, this makes me think of, because I'll even notice like, and I've heard people say this, like they start to think in like Facebook wall updates that used to be the thing, or like in tweets and stuff, like
no,
fit this into 72, you know, characters or whatever. And so when I notice my brain doing that, I try to relax it as a part of a mindfulness practice, because I don't want to conceptualize my life through any framework, whether it's social media as an extreme example, or whether it's myself as a writer, you know, TM, like the identity of a writer. Because I feel like once I've objectified that identity, then I'm not, you know, you're not creative anymore. Now you're a little, you know, statue. I'm a writer, you know, like you're this static thing. And there's this beautiful story that kind of illustrates it. So I'll tell it very quickly, and then we can wrap up. But the story is of a solar eclipse, and there is a scientist on one side. There's a mountain. There's a scientist on one side at the base of the mountain. He's got all of his measuring instruments, you know, all of his like note-taking implements and all that. He's getting ready for the eclipse. So he, you know, he sees the eclipse through numbers and figures and calculations. And then on the other side of the mountain, there's the shepherd. And the shepherd, you know, he has a sheep. He's just out there with his sheep. He's hanging out with the sheep. And this isn't the original story, but I like to put an artist in there too. So we've got like this triangle going on at the base of the mountain. And the artist is seeing the eclipse through, you know, his or her paints, or, you know, whatever it is, you know, clay, whatever the implement, the medium is that the artist is using. And I see it sort of as a gradient of truth, because of course there's scientific truth, right? And that's important. But is that the clearest way to experience a solar eclipse, right? And then there's art, which is impressionistic and highly subjective and feeling based and maybe intuitive based. And that's another way to experience the solar eclipse. And then there's the shepherd, and, you know, let's imagine him in a time where he doesn't understand the scientific ramifications of a solar eclipse. To him, it's a one-to-one like sign from God. Like there's no interference, there's no conceptualization, because he's just a shepherd. You know, he has no sense of identity about how he relates to the eclipse, what the eclipse even is. You know, to him it's just pure awe, like a baby, right? Like a baby might see some, you know, anything that, you know. And so I always remind myself of that, like whatever I'm doing in my life, I don't want to become the thing. I don't want to become the scientist or even the artist. I want to always see life as the shepherd sees life. Oh, Rene.
Sorry, that's beautiful.
I love you so much.
That got to me, okay?
Yeah, it gets to me too. It does. It gets to me too.
I love that she's crying. Her cries on a dime. You're so a quiver, Rene. You know what? At one point I had a brilliant teacher who said, to be a quiver is to be so in touch. It's your brilliance, is to be so in touch with every story. Like you just ate that. You just dissolved that story into your skin and you tasted it.
Well, I want to be like the shepherd too, because I'm definitely the scientist and the artist. I am. And yet I want to be like the shepherd, like I've never seen an eclipse before. What is that? I don't want to put my own agenda on it. It really spoke to me. It's a beautiful story.
But isn't that even an agenda?
Yeah.
It's because you want, yeah, exactly. It's like when you sit down to meditate and you're like, okay, I'm going to meditate now. I'm going to clear my mind now. As long as you have that agenda, you keep going in loops. But then when you can really get back to like that beginner's mind, which you can't try to do, it's this, the catch-22 of life, right?
Well, before you go into your meditation, I definitely wanted to ask E, because it's one of the things that I'm so fascinated with about you. Your meditation practice is the most consistent, and it's like your left leg. It's huge to your being. So I wanted to ask you, and I don't even know what to ask you, but what you could tell us about your meditation practice.
I love that question because I finally have an answer after 30 years of meditating. When I first started meditating, it was, like most people, just mind F radio, right? Okay, I'm not going to say that word. Like it's just,
yeah, we got that.
I'd have these glimpses of moments where my mind would cease to badger me. And then I was in a really serious practice for 4 years in my 20s. And it was a twice a week class, 4-hour class. And I was getting a practitioner, a spiritual practitioner license. And so really we meditated so much. And you had to have a daily meditation practice too. So then every once in a while I'd find, wow, that I feel different after that meditation. So it's really been a journey. And it's not going to stay the same as it is now either. It's going to be different next year. But right now, what happens is really simple. I get in my sitting position, and it doesn't have, I'm not real like yoga-ish about it. I can have my legs straight out in front of me and I have my meditation blanket though, it's important, and which a friend made me when my son passed away. So it's beautiful. I put it on top of me. And all I have to do is look behind my eyes, close my eyes and look behind them and watch everything drop right into my heart. And in that moment, like right now, there's a knowing that all is well, that the source is here too with me as I speak these words, and that it is everything. And so I need nothing, I want for nothing. And in that space of safety like that, things just appear, and they're so fun, and see connections and harmony in life, and it's really beautiful. And I guard it. I can be anywhere, camping trip, in a hotel, and I'm gonna get up and meditate first thing in the morning. And then I also like to meditate once in the evening, but much shorter. The morning meditation is usually an hour, sometimes longer, and it's divine. It is so divine. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that I spent all those years in Mindfuck Radio to get to this place. And by next year, it will be different yet. Yeah. Because that's the thing about creativity, is that it makes everything an adventure. And without it, you dull out. Without the creativity, without the adventure in life, you dull out. That doesn't mean you have to go do something wild. You can put an adventure into your daily to-do list, Yeah. You can put creativity into that.
Beautifully said.
It is. And actually, we did not talk about this ahead of time, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would like to offer, if you want to lead the meditation, I think that would be really lovely. But if you don't, I will totally take the reins and do that. But
hey, here we go. I'm so happy.
You're into it? Okay.
If it doesn't cry, I'm going to feel a little bit robbed here. No, just kidding. Okay. So I invite you, anyone watching or listening, to turn within with us. And release your breath. And as we release our breath, we Also release the need to think. In this moment, we just don't have to. We don't have to solve anything. We don't have to look at the to-do list. We don't have to be busy, and our mind can rest in thee. Rest in the knowing that all is well, all is beautiful, all is harmonious. Rest in knowing that our creativity can bring us through any difficult circumstance. It's stronger than the circumstance. And it is on a cellular level that these truths be known to us, that we are here for a beautiful purpose, self-defined, that we are here for beautiful relationships to our home, to our loved ones, to our friends, to people we haven't even met yet. That we are here for adventure. Let every hike and every chore and every task show us more of the beauty of life, that we may see our spirit, our God, whatever we believe in the eyes of every human, that we may take the time to acknowledge the wonder of our lives. And it is in this knowing that I can ask, is there anything I can leave behind today? Any thought, any action that isn't really serving who I'm becoming now? Can I leave it behind and move forward? And grab a new idea out of the air about who I'm going to be? Because it's all there. It's all there within me. It's all there within you. And so I give thanks. Giving thanks for this podcast that isn't a podcast, it's a video cast. And Crystal and Rene, their knowledge and experiences, this chance to express myself. I give thanks for this moment of depth and meditation. I know that everything's unfolding exactly as it should be, and so it is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I feel like the whole entire conversation, this whole 45 minutes, has been really a meditation. And I feel it. I just feel it all over me. So thank you both.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Absolutely. Take care.